there, my name is Tiffany. Welcome to Makeup and Monarchies. I am a hairstylist, makeup artist, and lover of all things UK medieval history. Today we're talking about the youngest two boys of Edward III. This is Edmund of Langley and Thomas of Woodstock. So without holding things up, let's just get right into it. Hi, it's been a minute. So we're talking the last two sons of Daddy Edward. So today we're doing Edmund of Langley and Thomas of Woodstock. Edmund was the sixth surviving child, fourth surviving son of Philippa of Hainault and Edward III. Edmund was born on June 5th of 1341 at Daddy Edward's Manor in King's Langley in Hertfordshire. A tournament was held to celebrate his birth. Edmund was baptized by Michael of Mentmore, the abbot of St. Albans. Michael was named as one of Edmund's godfathers, along with John de Warenne, 7th Earl of Surrey, and Richard Fitz-Alan, 1st Earl of Arundel. Edmund was brought up in his mother's household until the age of 13. So that following year in 1355, his younger brother was born. Thomas was born on January 7th at Woodstock Palace in Oxfordshire. He was not the first son of the royal couple named Thomas. The first son named Thomas was born in 1347, the summer of 1347, but he died a little over a year later of the Black Death. Like Edmund, Thomas was raised in his mother's household. When Edmund was 6, so backing up a little bit, one of his godfathers, John, died. And when this happened, Edmund was granted his John's lands in the north of the Trent, which was primarily in Yorkshire. 1359, Edmund went with Daddy Edward, so he's about 18 at this point. That sounded weird outside. On a military expedition to France, and that was not successful. It was in 1361 that Daddy Edward wanted to marry Edmund to Margaret of Flanders. Now, she was a 12-year-old widow that was the only child and heir of Louis II, Count of Flanders. Her 15-year-old husband, Philip I, Duke of Burgundy, had died during a riding accident. To make Edmund more desirable as a spouse for her, Daddy Edward created him Earl of Cambridge. Now, don't think for a second that Daddy Edward wasn't doing this for his own personal gain. If this marriage went through, Margaret's father's lands could have helped Daddy to get to the French crown. But this all went by the wayside when John II of France claimed Burgundy and married his son, Philip the Bold, to Margaret. Now, come the 70s, Edmund took part in several military expeditions to France, backing up to 69 a little bit. He brought 400 men at arms and 400 archers to serve with John Hastings, 2nd Earl of Pembroke, on campaigns in Brittany and in Angoulême. The next year, he went with Pembroke again to relieve the fortress of Belle Perche and went to accompany his older brother, Edward the Black Prince, while he was on campaign, and this resulted in the siege of Limoges. Edmund got married in 1372 to Isabella of Castile. Isabella's older sister was married to Edmund's brother, John of Gaunt, and she went to England to accompany her sister, Constance. At the time of their marriage, Edmund was 31 and Isabella was 17. They were married at Wallingford in Oxfordshire, and this was part of a dynastic alliance to further the Plantagenet claim to the crown of Castile. Now, my last one was John of Gaunt. So he was a claimant to the Castilian throne because of his marriage to Constance, the older sister. So this marriage is said to have been an ill-matched pair. However, their first child was born the following year. It was a son named Edward, and 2 years later they welcomed another child, a girl named Constance. So it's a valid assumption to say that this little girl was named after her Uncle John's new wife and her aunt. Edmund was appointed constable of Dover Castle and warden on the Cinque Ports on June 12th of 1376, and he held this office until 1381. Thomas was married around August 24th of 76. He married Eleanor de Bohun, who was daughter of Humphrey de Bohun and Joan Fitzalan. After their marriage, they were given Pleshy Castle in Essex, and Thomas was appointed Constable of the Realm, which was a position that was previously held by the Bowens. At the time of their marriage, Thomas was 21 and Eleanor was like 10 or 11. The year after their marriage, Daddy Edward died, but before his death, he knighted Thomas, and he gave him the title of Earl of Buckingham. 11 days after Daddy Edward's funeral, Edmund and Thomas's nephew Richard was crowned king. Now, Richard was the oldest surviving son of their older brother, Edward the Black Prince. Many thought that the surviving sons of Daddy Edward should be king. So that would have been either John of Gaunt, Edmund, or Thomas, but more than likely it would have gone to John. The three boys were excluded from the councils that ruled over Richard's minority. However, as the boys, or as the uncles of the king, they held great influence over the business of government. Edmund had been granted Fotheringhay Castle in Northamptonshire, and this became a favorite home of the Dukes of York. He was also given Ansley Castle in Hertfordshire. I am going to do my liner. Be right back. After their marriage and while living at Pleshy Castle, Eleanor's younger sister lived with them under their care. It was thought she would become a nun and was instructed in religious doctrine. This was in hopes that the inheritance of the Bohun family would go directly to Thomas and Eleanor, but big brother John had other plans. More on that in a minute. Between 1377 and 80, Thomas was a part of the last battles of the first phase of the 100 Years' War. July of 1380, the English army was sent under Thomas to support his position. Because of the worry about safety of a shipping route to Brittany, the army was sent to Calais. Thomas and the army of 5,200 men marched east of Paris. Then they were confronted by the army of Philip the Bold at Troyes, but nothing came from this. In November, he laid siege to Nantes, but he found that he couldn't hold an effective stronghold. By January of 81, it was clear that the Duke of Brittany had reconciled with new King of France, Charles VI. Because of the alliance falling apart and a lot of his men dying from dysentery, Thomas abandoned the siege. When Thomas returned to England, he discovered that his older brother John had married his son, Henry Bolingbroke, to Thomas's wife's younger sister, Mary, the one that they had been taking care of. This didn't help an already strained relationship between the two boys, because Thomas was hoping to get possession of Mary's estates. But after he was part of crushing the Peasants' Revolt that same year, Thomas became more friendly with John. I'm trying to remember who, last episode we did was John, and remember he was at court in 81 with Catherine, and it was a whole to-do. One of these boys, I forget, was not thrilled about that whole thing. But also in 81, Edmund finally led an abortive expedition to press John's claim in Castile, joining with King Ferdinand in attacking Castile as part of the Ferdinand Wars. After months of indecisiveness, a peace was again declared between Castile and Portugal, and Edmund had to lead his troops home. It was in the same year that Edmund served as chief commissioner in Richard II's marriage negotiations to marry Anne of Bohemia. Now, come 1385, Edmund and Isabella welcomed their third child, second son, Richard. Now, remember a few minutes ago, I said that their marriage was ill-matched. Well, it's rumored that Isabella was a bit scandalous and had an affair with Richard II's half-brother, John Holland, 1st Duke of Exeter. And it's believed that this was a violent and lawless relationship. There is a possibility that this child, Richard, was actually the son of John Holland. In that same year, Edmund was created Duke of York and Thomas was made Duke of Gloucester, or as we say it locally, Gloucester. Even with this mark of favor, it didn't stop Thomas from becoming hostile towards his nephew, Richard, and his reign. Thomas became the head of the party that was opposed to the royal advisors. Thomas was in a position of authority because he was supported by the people who were not happy with the incompetence and extravagance of the king, be it real or alleged. He forced the dismissal and impeachment of Michael de la Pole, 1st Earl of Suffolk. He was also a member of the commission appointed in 1386 to reform the kingdom and royal household. I'm gonna pop off and do my mascara. I'll be back. In December of 1387, Thomas entered London and found that the king was powerless in their hands. He had previously threatened Richard with deposition, but he was stopped from this because of the influence of his colleagues. The following year found Thomas meeting with the Merciless Parliament in February, which was full of Thomas's supporters. He had led a successful rebellion against Richard and weakened his powers. At this time, Thomas and Eleanor had 5 children: Humphrey, Anne, Joan, Isabel, and Philippa. On December 23rd, 1392, Edmund's wife, Isabella, died at about 37 years old. She was buried at the priory of the Dominicans at King's Langley. In her will, she named Richard as her heir, Richard II, as her heir, and requested he grant her son an annuity of 500 marks. Richard complied. The following year, Edmund remarried, and this marriage was to Joan Holland. Does that name sound familiar? Like from a few minutes ago? Joan was the niece to John Holland, who Edmund's first wife, Isabella, had an affair with. This is such a tangled web. These two did not have any children. She was 13-ish at the time of their marriage, and she actually never had children in her life. Okay, I am going to jump off and blow dry my hair, and I will be right back. Well, actually, you know what? I'm gonna show you what I'm gonna use. So I'm gonna use Rusk Blow Foam. It's a root lifter, but sometimes I use it to scrunch my hair to make it curly. And then I'm going to use Kenra's blow dry spray. So in 94-95, Edmund acted as keeper of the realm when Richard campaigned in Ireland and Edmund resided over Parliament. He was also keeper of the realm the following year in 96 when Richard went to France to get his child bride, Isabella of Valois. Okay, so we're gonna jump back to the other bit of drama. Come 96, Thomas and Richard were on the outs again. Put that on the wrong hole, didn't I? Oh, I didn't. I used to have my ears gauged, and I was up to sometimes they don't go in right away. So come 96, Thomas and Richard are on the outs again. And in 97, Thomas is arrested at his home by Richard himself. It was then that he was imprisoned, or he was taken and imprisoned in Calais. So he was imprisoned in Calais awaiting his trial. And while he was there, he was murdered by being smothered between 2 feather beds. This group of murderers was probably led by Thomas de Mowbray, 1st Duke of Norfolk. This group was assumed to be on behalf of Richard II himself. Parliament declared Thomas guilty of treason and his estates were forfeited. We have time to like sit and chat for a second. These actions caused an outcry among the nobility and it is considered to have added to Richard's unpopularity. Thomas was buried in Westminster Abbey in October of 97. His title, Earl of Buckingham, was inherited by his son Humphrey, but Humphrey died 2 years later. Thomas's daughter, Anne, had married into the Stafford family, two of the brothers. Her son from her second husband, Edmund, inherited the Duke of Buckingham title. Now, if you're familiar with the War of the Roses and beyond, you're going to recognize that the name Stafford and associate it with the Buckingham title. This is where the two are joined. This is where the Stafford family receives that title. Come 1399, Richard had exiled his cousin Henry Bolingbroke the previous year, and his will refers to his successor without naming who it was. His older brother John died, and Edmund was appointed as one of the overseers. Some people think that Richard was intending to make Edmund his heir, even though Henry Bolingbroke had a stronger claim. This is why. The summer of that year, while Richard was back in Ireland again, Henry landed at Bridlington in Yorkshire. Edmund raised an army against him, but then he decided to join him. After this, Edmund remained loyal to the Lancastrian regime because Henry deposed Richard and became Henry IV on October 13th of 1399. Richard was then imprisoned at Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire. He died there 4 months later on February 14th of 1400. The exact cause of Richard's death is unknown, but it's believed he was starved to death. Following these dramatic measures, Edmund retired from public life. He died on August 1st of 1402. It's believed he died at his birthplace at Epworth in Lincolnshire. He was interred into King's Langley Priory. In 1575, he was moved to All Saints Church in King's Langley after the priory was dissolved. His tomb was moved again in 1877 during restoration work. And it was during this move that it was discovered that there were 3 bodies in there, 1 male, 2 female inside. His dukedom was inherited by his son Edward, and Edmund was the last of his siblings to die and lived the longest out of all of them. Let's get into fun facts. So first fun fact, I have 2. I have 1 for each of the boys. So the first one is the House of York was established by Edmund, and through him we get Daddy York, Richard Plantagenet. He was father to Edward IV and Richard III, and every monarch. I'm going to say that, but it's excluding Henry VII, but including his wife Elizabeth of York. So every UK monarch since Edward IV is related to Richard Plantagenet. But I mean, everybody in the world is related to Edward III. So my second one is some believe that Thomas died of natural causes, but I do not think that. The timing of his death was way too convenient for it to be natural causes, and especially if he had been found guilty of treason. So that to me doesn't make sense, but I digress. So anyways, that's all I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed. We are almost done with Edward III. I have the 2 girls left, and then we're gonna move on. If anybody has a suggestion or wants like a specific title, like a specific person or location to go over, I just have an idea. Let me know in the comments below if you want to hear something. As usual, all the products I use is listed down below. If you are on Instagram, TikTok, you can find me over there at Makeup and Monarchies. And lastly, if you enjoy what I do and you would like to help me in this endeavor, you can head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Makeup and Monarchies. So with that all being said, please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment below. I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. Bye.